The sky turned to fire, and 60 kilometers away, a man was thrown clean off his porch. He said the whole northern horizon tore open and blazed white. A wall of heat hit him so fast, he was sure his own shirt had caught alight. Then the sound arrived, booms like cannon fire, windows bursting across the valley. It was a quiet June morning in 1908, deep in Siberia, and whatever had done this went off over an empty forest, with the force of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. This is the largest impact event in recorded history, and more than a century later, we are still arguing about the last piece of it. Line that up in your mind. One explosion a few kilometers above the trees flattened 80 million of them. It leveled an area the size of a major city. More than 2,000 square kilometers of forest snapped and swept to the ground in a single instant. The trees fell in a vast radial pattern like grass combed flat, every trunk pointing away from one central point. And here is the first strange thing. There was no crater. Nothing had landed. Whatever carried the force of 1,000 bombs never actually touched the earth. So what leaves a wound that size and no body? For a while, the rest of the world didn't even know where to look. The shockwave rolled clean around the planet. Pressure instruments in Britain, thousands of kilometers away, twitched as it passed. Then the nights turned wrong. For days afterward, across Europe and Asia, true darkness never came. In London, people read their newspapers outdoors at midnight. Ships' crews steered by a strange glow with no moon in the sky. Something enormous had happened somewhere far to the east. Instruments felt it, the sky remembered it, but almost no one knew what had actually happened or exactly where. And the answer was sitting in one of the emptiest places on Earth. The blast had gone off above the stony Tunguska River, deep in Siberia, remote even by Russian standards. There were no cities out there to destroy, almost no witnesses beyond scattered reindeer herders and a handful of traders at a lonely outpost. And in 1908, Russia was already sliding toward revolution and war. So the largest explosion anyone had ever recorded detonated over empty Taiga, and the wider world simply shrugged and moved on. It would be 19 years before a single scientist reached the site, and when one finally did, he wasn't chasing a mystery at all. He was chasing treasure. His name was Leonid Kulik, a Soviet mineralogist with one fixed idea. He was certain a giant iron meteorite had struck Siberia, and that somewhere out there sat a crater and a fortune in space metal waiting to be claimed. In 1927, after a punishing trek through frozen swamp and dense taiga, Kulik finally pushed into the blast zone. He expected a hole in the ground. He expected twisted iron. Instead, the forest itself stopped him cold. What he saw out there would turn a treasure hunt into one of the strangest scenes in the whole history of science. And it would take another 80 years to fully explain. For kilometer after kilometer, the forest lay flat. Millions of trunks stripped bare and thrown down, and every last one pointed the same way outward like compass needles fleeing a center. So Kulik walked against them inward toward the point they were all running from, and at that center he found the strangest thing of all. The trees were still standing. Upright, but with every branch and every strip of bark torn clean away. A forest of bare telegraph poles, dead on their feet at the exact heart of the blast. Whatever had killed this forest, it had come from directly above it, but the thing Kulik had crossed a continent to find simply wasn't there. No crater, no giant iron meteorite. He searched for years across expedition after expedition, even draining bogs he hoped were buried impact holes. He found nothing that fit. Whatever flattened a forest the size of a city and lit the skies of Europe had vanished, leaving 80 million fallen trees and not one clear fragment of itself. No shard of iron, no lump of rock. Nothing to weigh, or measure, or put behind glass. So sit with that question because it drove the whole mystery for decades. What hits with the force of 1,000 bombs and never lands? Here is the answer most scientists now accept. It was never meant to land. Picture a rock from space, maybe 50 or 60 meters across, hitting the top of the atmosphere at tens of thousands of kilometers an hour. The air in front of it can't get out of the way. It compresses and superheats, and a few kilometers up, the whole object detonates, one single colossal airburst. No impact. No crater, just a downward wall of heat and pressure that slams into the forest below. It explains the flattened trees. It explains the bare trunks left standing directly underneath. And it explains the detail that haunted this case for a century, why there was almost nothing left to find. The airburst is the consensus, but it is not the end of the argument, because agreeing it was an airburst only opens the next question. What actually blew up? One camp says a stony asteroid, a solid rock that shattered in the sky. Another says a fragment of a comet, a dirtier ball of ice and dust, which would have vaporized almost completely and would neatly explain the missing debris. For decades, researchers have combed the soil for microscopic clues, Tiny beads of melted rock, chemical traces locked inside the tree resin. The evidence leans toward an asteroid, but a full century on, even that isn't fully closed. And in the gap where science paused, everything else came rushing in. You have probably heard some of it. That Tunguska was one of Nikola Tesla's experimental death rays fired across the world and lost. That it was a speck of antimatter annihilating in the air. A tiny black hole punching straight through the planet. A crashing alien spacecraft. They make for thrilling stories, and not one of them has any scientific evidence behind it. The forest doesn't need aliens or antimatter to explain it. A large rock and a lot of physics already do the whole job. The wilder the event, it seems, the wilder the theories it attracts. But here is what's easy to miss. The real scientists haven't fully closed the file either. In 2007, an Italian team pointed to a small, oddly deep lake near the blast zone, Lake Chico. They suggested it might be a crater, gouged out by one surviving fragment of the object. It was a bold idea and it made headlines, but other researchers pushed back hard. The lake, they argued, looks far too old to have been born in 1908. The claim is contested and it is not widely accepted. But the exact size of the object, its precise path, the fate of its last missing pieces, those are still genuinely debated in the journals today. The headline is settled, the fine print is not. And that fine print is the part that should keep you up at night, because the Tunguska object was not a planet killer. It was small city block small, the kind of rock we now know drifts past Earth all the time. In 1908, it went off over empty forest and the world barely noticed. Send the same rock over a modern city, and it erases that city in a single morning. That is why June the 30th is now marked, all over the world, as Asteroid Day. So the real mystery of Tunguska was never really what it was. We mostly know that now. The mystery is the one it left hanging over every one of us, not what but when. There are rocks like it crossing our path right now, uncounted and mostly unseen. One of them has our name on it, we just don't know its arrival date. So tell me in the comments, do you think we would actually see the next one coming? I'll meet you in the next unsolved case.